Here's a recap of our top stories this hour. Caster Semenya has 30 days to appeal today's decision by the Court of Arbitration for Sport, which has given the IAAF the go-ahead to introduce regulations to limit testosterone levels in female athletes with differences in sexual development. And workers across the country have been marking Workers' Day. In Durban, ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa has promised workers that their interests will be put first. Right, now to talk to us a little bit more about the economy and the jobs and the significance of Workers' Day, I'm now joined in studio by Minister Ebrahim Patel, who's the Minister of Economic Development. Thanks very much for joining us. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much, Peter, and happy Workers' Day to you and to all South Africa's workers.
Yeah, Workers' Day, we're working, that's what it is. All right, so it's a big day for the workers in general. I think there's a certain layer in society that often doesn't regard it as their day. It's often seen as a blue-collar day, but it's more than that, isn't it?
It's much more than that. In fact, the history of Workers' Day, International Workers' Day, goes back to 1886, when workers first put up the demand for an 8-hour working day. So in some ways, you could say anyone who has a weekend off or who has time off, an 8-hour working day, would have benefited from the idea that with economic growth must go social progress, that workers more generally should benefit. There used to be a slogan in the old days, that the union movement is the people that brought you the weekend.
Right,
you know? So it's more broad. In the context of South Africa, of course, it goes over very serious issues. How to create more jobs, because Workers' Day has to be about more job creation too, because the unemployed are really a key part of the agenda of organized workers. And secondly, it's the conditions, the quality of employment. Things like wages, working conditions, and other standards like that. Trying to do this in a globalized world where the challenges, the opportunities, the threats of the fourth industrial revolution, this major change in technology with robotics, with artificial intelligence and so on, means that on International Workers' Day, now in 2019, the society faces big, deep and profound questions about the future of work.
All right, so people are going to be marking X next to a party next week, and jobs are a big issue. And perhaps we can start by saying, what have you done, do you think, enough to earn an X against the ANC in terms of the creation of jobs?
You know, Peter, there's this famous saying by Madiba, where he said, I've walked the long road to freedom. I have tried not to falter. I've made missteps. And the lesson has been every time I get to the top of the hill is to see many more hills. And in a way, the job story is like that. There's been progress. I want to tell you very briefly the progress, but I don't want to underplay the enormously long road we still have to travel. So let's look over the 25 years of our democracy. We've been able to create, the economy has created more than 7.5 million new jobs. When Madiba took the oath of office, there were fewer than 9 million South Africans who were working. Today there are more than 16.5 million people working. And it's not just the long sweep of the 25 years that we can look at. We can even take a more recent period, take the last 5 years, the current administration, because in a way people are going to be thinking about that. The net job creation has been 1.5 million new jobs. And by that I mean, if you take into account some jobs have been lost, some jobs have been gained, you aggregate that, the net effect of that is 1.5 million additional jobs in the economy. Is that enough for what we need to do? Absolutely not. But interestingly, this has been the fifth administration that's coming to its close on the 8th of May when South Africans make that X. So you can think of 5 periods of electoral mandate. And in those 5 periods, this past 5 years has been the second biggest job-creating 5-year period of the democracy. But you may well ask, and I think it's a fair question, when we've had fairly significant job growth, 1.5 million net new jobs, why do we still have high unemployment? And in fact, in many cases, you have young people just struggling to find work. I think it's to do with a combination of population growth, but more importantly, we are a young population, so more people come into the labor force. But even then, it's not a sufficient explanation. It's also to do with a tectonic change in our society. More people are leaving subsistence farming in the rural areas and coming into urban areas. And that matters because, Peter, the way in which we calculate jobs, if you live in Lubala, in Lusikisiki, and you basically do some farming for your own account, you don't sell it, the community is in survival mode, you're not counted as employed, and you're not counted as unemployed. The minute you leave Lubala and you go to Buffalo City and you don't have a job, you are unemployed. And so this change is placing enormous pressure on the labor market. In the long term, it's good for society that we're urbanizing because urban societies are wealthier societies and they create enormous opportunities. But in the period we're going through, it places the labor market under enormous pressures.
But bottom line, you haven't done enough. And in fact, you've been failing gradually. You may be creating more jobs, but the level of unemployment has been increasing. So the net effect is it's getting worse.
I think, Peter, it's a double story. For some people, it's getting better in the sense that they now have a job that they would previously not have had. And in many cases, a better quality job. We've passed the national minimum wage that has lifted, that will be lifting millions of workers out of poverty. And we've created a bit more security of employment. On the other hand, we have young people searching for work, coming out of university, coming out of school, some of them not completing school and looking for a job. And for them, life is tough. Life is tough and we've got to do a lot more. So how do we do that? It's the skills revolution is key. Education is at the heart of greater labor absorption because the kind of new jobs that the economy can create are not simply basic jobs. It's not unskilled work. It's work that requires more skills. Yes, let's call it schooling. You need your matric certificate, but also a little bit more post-schooling. So the focus has to be on getting young people into technical college or university. And technical college, by the way, is often underplayed.
Okay, so
very
Minister,
important.
People, I can tell you right now, are saying, but you've been saying this year after year. You've known what to do year after year. What's different now? You're saying what we heard 5 years ago.
I would put it in context, Peter. We had this enormous challenge with the global economic crisis in 2009. The global economy went into meltdown. South Africa lost 1 million jobs. Over that administration, it was just trying to recover. In fact, the economy created less than 500,000 jobs in that total 5-year period. It was trying to avoid a complete meltdown. In the following 5 years, which is the one we've just spoken about now, we've increased that from 500,000 net new jobs to 1.5 million net new jobs. And what President Ramaphosa has brought to government is a new vision that I think will ensure that our ability to create more jobs is higher. And I point you to the Jobs Summit that was held in October last year, where we got commitments, very significant commitments, from the trade union movement, from the employers, from business more generally to work with us. And then finally there was the investment conference, 300 billion rand that business said they will put on the table over the next 5 years to create new jobs in South Africa and to deepen what we do. So I think it's perhaps a better characterization is...
So there's a promise of investment, but we haven't seen much of it yet. We've had a few, and some people will argue that investment was already coming anyway, so it was already planned. It's not new initiatives. I'm going to look at you. I looked at your website, and one of the things there is to promote, this is your aims, to promote government's ability to achieve its goals of advancing economic development with decent work opportunities. The economy's not growing, so do we look to you and say that you haven't done your job?
Well, Peter, I think I would take the point that the economy needs to grow faster. But if you look at the end of this administration, the economy is R250 billion bigger today than it was 5 years ago on an annual basis. So we are having growth, economic growth, but we need to lift that. And of course, the issue with economic growth is it's subject to so many things. It's subject to better investment in skills, a point I've raised. So what we've done now as government, we're putting enormous resources into higher education. You've seen the fee-free schooling policy. We're revamping basic education by committing to introducing more technology. Hopefully, we'd be able to do a lot more, including tablets for these computer tablets for children at high school. And then the area that I have specific responsibility for is competition policy, opening the economy to new entrants, young people, black South Africans, and avoiding a closed shop regime where effectively the existing large monopolies have a stranglehold on the economy. And that, I think, is where we've begun to see quite significant
We'll talk
progress.
about that just now, actually, because you had a big thing with the data pricing just this past week. Let's talk about that just now. But once again, economic development, you're saying we're growing, but I'm going to compare like with like. We are growing slower than our counterparts in the developing nations category. So what is it that they're doing right? There must be something we're doing wrong because we're in the same global economy.
I think, let me start by indicating where I think we need to catch up much faster. So start with corruption and state capture, because we've got to be open about that. It has limited the ability of the economy to grow, no question about it. My ministry did a study about 2.5, maybe close to 3 years ago, looking at the cost of corruption and state capture on the economy. And we translated it to GDP figures. And there was unquestionably that when people take money for private purposes that ought to go into growth, it slows down the economy. And in fact, it can lead to big challenges. We've had a slowdown in infrastructure spending. We ramped up infrastructure spending till about 2015, and thereafter it began to fall. And that meant you slowed down the economy. The third area, I think, is our markets have not been big enough for us to be able to get to higher-end manufacturing. We can't compete in the global economy on the absolutely cheap labor scale. So there are some economies where labor costs are very, very low, and they're growing fast because they've got that advantage. We need to find advantage in niche markets, in advanced manufacturing, in new products that we bring to market, in higher productivity in the workplace. And those have been areas that require these systemic changes that I've alluded to, skills, technology, and I hope we can get to the data price point, and also the opening of the market. So that's been where South Africa has struggled. Now, what are we doing about it? Last year, the President signed an agreement in the African Union that will knit together more than 52 countries on the African continent to create an enormous single market that South African manufacturing can play to. So instead of seeking to bring wages down to the lowest, which doesn't fit with our constitutional commitment to fair labor practices, we're trying to say, let's go for efficiencies, productivity gains through enormous production runs in a larger market, as one example. There are other examples, but I'm happy to talk about those.
Well, we're running out of time, so let's talk about competition. And this week, the Competition Commission, data pricing, the Commission of Inquiry came out with a report. And perhaps you can take us through what the findings were, because we, the consumers, have been paying, we believe, and we've been told, higher prices for data than other countries, but the same providers.
Exactly. So I want to make 2 points. One is about data and about the importance of data in jobs. So that in a way, we connect it to the theme of May Day. Data is absolutely fundamental to the global economy and to South Africa's own future. If you think about it, there are new businesses that have arisen as a result of the availability of data. You can put it this way, that the 20th century was about oil and steel. The 21st century is going to be about data. And so economies must try to ensure that you get data at competitive prices and that it's easily available to small businesses, to the economy as a whole, and to consumers, to young people. So there are many things we need to do. One of those is to focus on data prices. And the data price issue has been one that has been brought to our attention. In June 2017, I asked the Competition Commission to investigate data prices, to look at benchmarking it against prices globally. And they gave their provisional report a few days ago. This report is now open for public discussion, and then they'll finalize. So these are provisional findings. I emphasize that. But the provisional finding of the Competition Commission is based on a careful analysis. They've concluded that South Africa's prices are high, higher than it should be, and higher than it is even in the same company operating in different countries. So you have some of the larger mobile phone operators that are not only in South Africa, and the Commission found that they were charging higher prices here than elsewhere. But perhaps as worrying to us, Peter, is the provisional finding of the Commission that poorer consumers were paying more per unit of data than wealthier consumers. And if you want equitable development in your society, you want to empower poorer consumers to come into the data area.
So somewhere along the line, you've got to put your hand up, though, because you allowed this almost monopolistic environment to persist for so long, to have a few providers. And these data costs have been high for a long time. Why does it take to 2017 before an inquiry? Where was government to protect us from this?
So in 1994, government, at the same time as the transition to democracy, government licensed 2 mobile operators. You'll recall there were Vodacom and MTN. And the idea then was that these 2 would compete with each other. That if you have competition between 2 players, prices would be low, technology would be enhanced, and access would be expanded. It didn't work quite as easily, so government opened the door to additional operators, brought in Cell C and brought in Telkom. So you had 4 operators, mobile operators, in this space. Now, for a market this size, 4 operators ordinarily ought to mean that there would be competition. And for a number of years, mobile phone companies were saying, actually, there isn't a price problem. Our prices are fair, are competitive. And we left it, of course, both to normal competition. We were watching them to see, is there collusion between these players? Is there any abuse of dominance? Is there any
more
breach?
Could have been done earlier.
Well, we found out, Peter, that part of the challenge was in the legal regime. And so we went to Parliament and we needed to make a wholesale change to the Competition Act. And that has gone through Parliament. Parliament passed that change just last year. But can I come back to jobs, to conclude on the jobs issue, because it's key. Data is not only about the convenience for young people of sending WhatsApp or sharing music or watching movies. It's that too. But it's also about employment. And last year, as an interesting example, the economy grew, in fact, out of the 1.5 million jobs that I told you about, 358,000 were created last year. Incidentally, the biggest one came from Gauteng. The Gauteng province created about 170,000 new jobs in that period.
I'm running out of time, and I just want to finish off with this whole data thing, because the operators are saying part of the problem is you, again, Mr. Government, because you're not giving them spectrum. You're not doing the migration quick enough. We've delayed forever, and this has forced them to be in a situation where they can't roll out as much as they could for cheaper. So you've got to put your hand up again for being part of the problem of the cost of data.
But you know, when we first said data prices were high, the response was a simple, that's not true. Prices are not high, comparatively speaking. Now that we've been able to provide credible data to show, in fact, that prices are too high, the argument now shifts and says, well, actually, it's the causes for it is not us as mobile operators, it's among others government for not releasing spectrum. I asked the Competition Commission, when they presented the preliminary findings publicly about a week ago, I said to them, what were the views of the mobile operators? And they said, interestingly, mobile operators in the representations to the Commission did not rely on the release of spectrum as their main argument. I happen to think we need to release spectrum. I think it can be very positive. And the reason it's not being released has been the delays with digital migration. Because you've got to clear, in a sense, create the facility. You've got to release the spectrum by migrating from analog television to digital TV. And there's been enormous challenges in getting that sorted out. So now the argument has gone to, well, actually, it's not us. I don't think it's very helpful to focus on that. I think the focus should be data prices are high. We happen to think that the mobile operators have a case to answer, but that's not where I want to focus. I want to focus on solutions. And for me, the solutions lie in coming up with measures that show ordinary South Africans that actually we have a plan that will bring data prices down. We can do it as government. We can simply regulate. And the industry will complain. Or we can say, let's do it in partnership.
Okay. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, and it always happens this way, but hopefully we'll get another opportunity to chat again. Who knows, it could be in your new job, in the new parliament, in the new government.
Happy Workers' Day to everyone.
Thank you so much indeed for joining us and sharing your thoughts with us. Thank you.
It's a great pleasure.
All right, we'll be back right at the top of the hour as we start to tell your story right here on SA Today. Stay with us.